Goes. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. And it's another one of our all things Eastern European affairs, where we cover both the history and current affairs of the region of Eastern Europe, all things former and current communist states episodes, and our all things Romania episodes. And who better to talk to us about the current state of affairs in Romania than Dr. Maria Cernat? Maria is currently president of the Institute for Media Research and Human Rights and is a lecturer at the Faculty of Communication Sciences and International Relations. And I'm always butchering this school's name, but at the Titu Maiorescu University. Sorry about that, Maria. It's the Yankee in me. She's also assistant professor at the Faculty of Communication Sciences and International Relations, Department of Communication and Public Relations at the Titu Maiorescu University, where she teaches many courses on media propaganda, media ethics, media criticism, and more. And from 2019 till 2024, she was contributor to The Barricade, a pan-Eastern European left-wing news outlet, and was co-host of the popular on their popular YouTube show On the Barricades. And right now, she has her own independent media project called Pacifist Barricade, and is part of World Beyond War's Romania chapter. And well, first of all, welcome back, Maria.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, and I'm glad to be here.
It's always an honor to get the chance to speak to you. And just before we get started, remember, folks, to share widely all of 1+1's content across social media. Please help us overcome the mostly far-right algorithms in corporate media by sharing our content, past and present. And please, please, please donate to 1+1, support independent media and this independent journalist, and donate generously if you're able to. And now to the topic at hand. So, Maria, we had you on a couple of weeks ago, because Romania had a big general election, and much to the surprise of Romania and all of Europe and the West, a complete unknown far-right candidate who got no coverage in the Romanian corporate press, no coverage in the Romanian state press, no magazines or newspapers or TV endorsements, wasn't even on a televised debate to make his pitch to voters. But this independent far-right candidate, Calin Georgescu, kicked the asses of the dominant center to left soft right parties and all the other far right parties. He just blew them out of the water because he was very savvy with TikTok and social media. So, of course, the response to this surprise victory and upset was that the Russians under Putin fooled the Romanians, and the electoral authorities in Romania have now barred Georgescu from participating in the second round of elections. And it's gone even worse than that, in which the Romanian authorities, backed by the EU and individual heads of states in Europe, have arrested Georgescu on very trumped-up charges. It's very much grotesque lawfare that he's being subjected to, and that's where we're at. But not only that, another far-right candidate in Romania called Diana S.O.S. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Hello?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Șoșoacă, yes, yes.
Okay, so Diana S.O.S.
Yes, yes.
So she was also barred from running for office, and all of this despite the fact that, like it or not, they do have tons of grassroots supports in multiple communities who do resonate with these people. However darkly farcical and eccentric their socioeconomic programs are. But hey, there are many people who do resonate, with them. So, Maria, what's your response to all of this? And is there anything I missed? And please give us some important updates to all of this.
Well, no, you haven't missed especially well-informed presentation of the situation. And what can I say more? Probably to give me an assessment of the reactions in Romania, which are troubling in the sense that mainstream press and mainstream intellectuals and even prominent leftists are supporting the decisions of the Constitutional Court and the Central Electoral Bureau that barred Calin Georgescu from running, and also Iovanovici-Șoșoacă. And usually, and also important voices in the political arena in the European Union kept silent or even encouraged what happened in Romania. And I find this to be more troubling than the events themselves, because what this proves is that we don't have, as I often told you, and I often told our viewers and the viewers of different shows where I was invited, we don't have the intellectuals antibodies, which is to fight this type of abuses, which I find even more troubling. And today the society is extremely polarized in the sense that all this hype, and emotional upheaval that was presented in the mainstream media created these camps. The pro-Georgescu supporters call all the others Sorosists or globalists, or sold to some very dark forces on the global arena, while the others consider Georgescu supporters even or stupid or pro-Russians. No nuance, no debate, no research, no space for dialogue, nothing. And, to tell you the truth, the situation is so hysterical that my only response was to post on Facebook a short dialogue from what I hope to be a theater play, because things are so incredibly polarized and people react so violently from the emotional point of view that you cannot miss, what you said, the farcical character of all this. I mean, this is the decaying bourgeois democracy at its best, when you have no real debate, no pluralism whatsoever, but you have a lot of theatrics. And you have PR, propaganda, theatrics, and no substance, because the substance was, evaporated once the Constitutional Court probably read Mark Twain, or the famous thinker that said a century back that if elections were actually going to change something, they will be forbidden. And this is what happened, because, and I don't know if, I'm not sure, because Calin Georgescu never ran on a platform of taking Romania out of the EU or taking Romania out of NATO. And only based on his declarations, I think his role model, if you like, would have been Viktor Orbán from Hungary. I mean, a rebel in the EU, a rebel in NATO, somebody with a point of view, somebody that's always blocking, the initiative, somebody that's always, like a nail in the shoe of the European Union, constantly opposing the decisions taken by the European Commission. But even that, it was not tolerated. And of course, conspiracy theories run wild, because, and what is even more troubling is that they are supported by a vast part of the establishment. Why do I say that? And this is my second observation. I am not against the idea that probably Russia interfered in our elections, because I am not pro-NATO, pro-Russia, pro-whatever. I mean, I'm open. I keep an open mind. And we had experiences in common, acquaintances that are a bit pro-Russian and are never willing to accept that it might have been the Russians. I'm not like that. I keep an open mind. But provide solid evidence. Where is the solid evidence showing This was the account of Calin Georgescu. These were the accounts of the associates. These were the Russians' account. This is how money came to the account of Calin Georgescu and his associates. This is how they paid for the ads. I mean, show me solid evidence and I'll believe you. There was a very, very comical interview, very funny interview with the Russian ambassador, who said exactly that. Oh, we interfered in your elections. We are curious ourselves to find out how exactly did we do it? Because,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe they did it. Maybe they were just playing with the journalists. Maybe they were just saying this tongue in cheek, but so far, unfortunately, I haven't seen that solid evidence that will prove without a doubt that it was the Russian interference in the elections. And while, Yuri, this might be a plausible explanation, okay, I accept it, and a hypothesis, it was not backed by solid proof. And for a country that invests a lot of money, and by a lot of money, I mean we are first in European Union among NATO countries to invest in secret services.
Wow.
We come after the United States and Great Britain. Can you imagine? So we invest like a lot of money in the secret services, and you would have expected to be all crystal clear, and you would have expected these services to prevent such interference because this is what we are paying them for. They came up with a report that is vague and doesn't provide solid evidence to support this accusation, okay? And this is also very troubling, that people were willing to believe that it was Russia without solid evidence. And there are cracks and more cracks, you know, in the public discourse and in the public sphere. In the sense that some of the most anti-Georgescu voices in the public discourse then switched sides and proposed Donald Trump to receive the Nobel Prize for Peace, you know. And then we had the pro-Georgescu meeting and rally where a lot of people attended. And then we had the pro-EU rally when they made a star, a heart, with the lights from their phones, but it was a very limited protest. Only a couple of thousands of people were present there. And it shows that the support for the EU and the support for the public narrative is running thin. Because as you can imagine, okay, you prevented Diana Șoșoacă from running on very shady and very shaky foundations, saying that if she is anti-EU in her public discourse, this is not under the umbrella of freedom of expression. This is in fact anti-constitutional because Romania assumed as its destiny to integrate in the European Union. And if you express views that are against this integration, then those views are anti-constitutional, which is very problematic to say the least. And I'm not saying this, there are specialists in the judicial science and law that say these reasons and these formulations of the Constitutional Court are problematic to say the least. Okay, so you are not letting these people run, but you know, the trust in institutions, trust in the public discourse is running thinner and thinner, unfortunately, because while Romania may not be as, you know, rebellious as some people might like, for instance, I had an interview with Scott Ritter, and you know he has this style. Romania, are you that stupid? Romania, what are you doing? You have now a candidate. Why are you not doing something? Well, you have to understand that every country has its ways. And I kept telling you that Romania has a solid rural background, that we don't have a strong urban tradition. There are all sorts of elements specific to our country, to our economy, to our way of being, that we might not be the most, willing to go on and protest, but at the same time, what is happening, and if I were to explain it from the media theories, Noel Neumann's spiral of silence, where people are not reacting, violently and openly in public, but they withdraw. And the moment they see the opportunity, a candidate that, resonates with them, they would vote for them, And this is in the voting booth when they are alone. This is where they will show their protest. And this is why they try to prevent all this. They call themselves sovereignists, in the sense that they want to be independent, they want to assert themselves, they want to say that Romania has to assert itself. And I do not comment on these ideas of having sovereignty in such an interconnected world, but this is their platform, okay? They ran on it, and a lot of people, exactly as you said, resonate with that. Now, they they validated the candidacy of George Simion. And this is, this is why it's the farcical character. And a lot of people, unfortunately, feel very demotivated. And I think they won't be attending these elections. I myself don't feel, any motivation to go and vote, because everything is such a sham, and such a theatrical, endeavor. Everything is it's a fakery, and you feel that this is a fake, and it resembles Iran, where you have this council of guardians that is doing this vetting process, where they verify and they evaluate themselves, the candidates, and it is after they evaluated the candidates, then the public has the right to vote. And you have this feeling, that it is this type of vetting that was going on. And at least in Iran, that this is the situation. I mean, Iranians know what to expect, whereas here it's all done under the guise of democracy, and we are preserving democracy.
Quite unbelievable. And actually, that's a perfect segue to this question, which is: are there any chance that Georgescu can countersue the Romanian courts over blocking him? Can he try to mount a successful appeal, both him and Miss?
No. Unfortunately, the legal ways and the legal channels
against.
Yes.
Well, then that's a perfect segue then to this question, which is what are Georgescu's supporters' backup plans? Because I was reading on...
Yes, the backup plan is the following, and this is the farcical character. Now pay attention. Look.
Okay.
After Calin Georgescu won the elections, in the reports done by the secret services, and I think it was the reports provided by the secret services of the police, I hope I'm not mistaken, because there were, I think, 3 institutions related to the secret services and security apparatus that provided reports. And in one of those reports, there were 2. Bob PR, an influencer, a well-known influencer, very rich one, that was named there that he supported Georgescu, and the company whose name was redacted in the reports. It was covered with black. And later on, journalists found out that that company was Kensington Marketing, and it was paid by the National Liberals. Of course, they denied the whole thing, but...
Actually, very quickly, so for folks who are illiterate on Romanian politics, the National Liberals is the dominant, I would call them far right, but they're the dominant center right party.
Yes, and
Romania,
they are also...
and Romania for the past several years has actually been ruled by the Social Democrats, which themselves, their socio-economic programs are also fairly to the right, but they tend to be very socially liberal, but not aggressively socially liberal. So I just wanted to.
Yes, and culturally they are conservatives, but they say economically they're a bit more progressive, and they rule from 2020 in the coalition with the National Liberals, who are also the party of the incumbent in president.
Yeah.
And also of the party of Klaus Rouhanis. And it is important because in one of the shows where I was invited, they asked me how did they do in the elections, because we also had parliamentary elections and they did poorly, somewhere around 15%. I mean, they went down and they are a marginal party. I mean, a third tier party, around 50%. And the National Liberals, did all these shenanigans in order to get rid of George Simion, because George Simion is the head of the Alliance of the Union of Romanians, who is the biggest sovereignist Romanian party. And perceiving George Simion as a real threat, they said to themselves, the National Liberals said to themselves, oh, we are going to support on TikTok Calin Georgescu, and we are going to steal just enough votes from George Simion that are going to go from Calin Georgescu. And this way we are going to prevent George Simion from entering the second round of presidential elections. Do you understand the devious ways they thought? I mean,
I'm
they
trying.
thought,
I'm
okay.
trying to understand the lack of.
So they thought, the National Liberals said to themselves, okay, so George Simion, the president of the Alliance for Romanians, who also took in the parliamentary elections around 30%, so a big party, said, okay, he's the real threat. What do we do to prevent him from entering the second round of presidential elections? We have to take enough votes for him. But in order to take enough votes for him, we have to think of a candidate that resembles him. So we have to support a marginal sovereignist to take just enough votes from him. And that marginal sovereignist was Calin Georgescu. So apparently, according to the reports from Snoop, this is a media outlet that published the report, through this company, Kensington Company, the National Liberals paid for ads on TikTok for Calin Georgescu. Isn't this interesting? So why would you pay for your opponent? Because they perceived Calin Georgescu as marginal, and they wanted him to serve as this type of candidate that will steal just enough votes from the real threat that they thought is George Simion. So they did all this calculation, and you see here how bourgeois democracy at its best, right? Where you pay somebody that you perceive to be marginal, but not marginal enough, that will steal some votes, but not enough. And what do you say? Calin Georgescu came first because it all blew in their faces. I mean, what was
actually, it reminds me very much of what WikiLeaks revealed when WikiLeaks revealed, how the Democrats, the Democratic National, the DNC, can't remember what the C stands for. But anyways, the WikiLeaks had revealed that the Clinton campaign and the leadership of the Democrats, the DNC, conspired to sabotage Bernie Sanders and so forth. And during the revelations, there was revelations in Hillary Clinton's email, her campaign's email, that that we should tell our friends in the media and so forth to actually prop up Donald Trump, because we think that we have the best chances of beating him compared to all of the other Republican candidates. And Lord, did that blow up in their faces? But of course, they later used the Russians. So I have to ask them this question, because that's fascinating that the Romanian establishment, the dominant parties, did that with Georgescu. So I have to ask this question. So Euronews, I was reading on Euronews, the EU-funded media outlets, but it's also a corporate media outlet, which is done in several languages. They said that that multiple far-right parties are actually backing Georgescu and are trying to support his efforts at being able to run. But if the powers to be continue to block him, any idea of where those of where those far right parties, where their support goes to, and what of the millions of voices who feel disaffected, rightly or wrongly, but they
Yes,
support
let me
Georgescu.
explain.
So, is there any other leading far right party in singular voice
Yes,
that you can see them
yes.
being supportive of, even though they all seem to be very pro NATO, endless Cold Wars with Russia, and apparently Georgescu is, as you mentioned, he is more Eurosceptic, but he is more Eurosceptic, but but he does want, détente with Russia, and he does want a sensible end to this ridiculous, war in Ukraine. So I'm curious your response.
Yes, he wants peace, and I think this is a hypothesis I don't have dated, but I think it was one of the themes that made him very popular. And now what happened is that George Simeon comes back because the Central Electoral Bureau and the Constitutional Court validated his candidacy. So far, he was not prevented from running. And the nightmare of the national liberals comes back. They tried all this thing with Georgescu to prevent George Simeon from running. And now, what do you say? George Simeon comes back. And the, the polls and the surveys indicate that he is the first in the preferences of Romanians. He has more than 30% of the voting intention. And the national liberals might not candidate, Crin Antonescu, might not even get in the second round of the presidential elections because second comes Nicușor Dan, who is the mayor of Bucharest, and he is an independent. So it will be very interesting.
Which is also interesting because Georgescu, also important to note, I completely forgot to mention this, Georgescu is also an independent, which is why he gets multiple supports from other, which is why he gets multiple supports. So he's actually an independent candidate.
Yes, yes. And now George Simeon, starts from pole position, from being the most popular among the voters. And we'll see what happens because we still have 1 month of electoral campaign. And we will see because if they did all this for nothing to end up with George Simeon, it will be even worse. And let me tell you why. Because George Simeon promised to name Calin Georgescu as prime minister. And let me tell you why this is worse. Because while the president has limited executive powers, and his power is limited to the security and he's not involved directly in the executive power. If he names Calin Georgescu the head of the executive, boy, it will be such fun because it will only mean that Calin Georgescu will have more power, not less. So you can see that the fight is on, and those who are currently, in power are desperate to prevent these people from winning the elections. And we'll see what will happen. It will be very interesting. Romania became very interesting for all the wrong reasons, unfortunately. But probably when you asked me why is nothing interesting in Romania, and I kept telling you that nothing interesting happened because everything was so frozen. I mean, the same people with the same discussions, and I kept telling you that something very, very weird is going on because of course, you have not much to expect from the bourgeois democracy, but at least in the past, it seemed more real. Whereas from 2020, where you had that very weird alliance between the National Liberals and the Social Democrats, everything started to look like, I don't know, so fake, so unreal, so detached from reality. It was one step further in the direction of having an irrelevant political life. And from now, let me tell you that it will be, a lot of people are so disappointed that I think that they won't be attending the elections because they feel betrayed. And a lot of people will vote for Calin Georgescu. And you can see the authorities and those who are currently in power are desperate to prevent the scenario where George Simeon will come to power. Because let me tell you that it will not be fun in the sense that you kept asking me, why do I not fully support, Romania exiting NATO, Romania exiting the EU? Because when this power structure is destructurating, is disappearing, when a power structure is crumbling, then there is a lot of instability, there is a lot of chaos, and unfortunately the most marginalized are the ones to pay the price. It's not a pretty sight when you have this type of changes in the society, and I don't know what's the best solution here, but we'll see. We'll see, because unfortunately these people, Yuri, don't have a plan, a backup plan. Say, I don't know, we invite China to make huge investments, and we rely on somebody else to come and take over, and we rely on somebody to help us economically. If the EU and NATO start crumbling and we can't rely on them anymore, they don't have a backup plan, they don't have the vision, they don't think 2 steps ahead. Okay, so let's say something terrible happens, let's say we can rely on these power structures. What do? They don't have this strategic thinking. Even if you like very much being in NATO and the EU, you have to have this strategic thinking, this plan B, always, watching your back, especially since you are a little country, and especially since you have this geographic position and you have access to the Black Sea, and you are in a position that makes you very tempting for big powers. You have to be able, to play and to have scenarios. I don't see that type of strategic thinking, despite the fact that we are paying so much money for the secret services. They publish rubbish articles with no scientific value whatsoever. And you don't see this type of very profound, well-informed, and very lucid and rational thinking. You are in a small boat in very, very, dangerous waters, and you always have to watch your back. You always have to look for strategies. You always have to have the best interest of your people at heart, not your own, and thinking, oh, I'm going to go now and become the head of NATO, and I'm going to take a huge salary. I'm going to make a name for myself. But what about my people? What about my people, These people don't have the plan B. This is the problem.
Well, interesting. And I have 2 more questions left. But so this is an interesting one I wanted to ask you about the EU. So, bigger picture and regionally speaking, the EU is playing, I think, a very, very dangerous game, supporting the barring of a politician who, because they disagree with him on 2 issues, they're actively interfering in the domestic politics of of a member state and blocking candidates. And for a political body like the EU, which the past several years, its popularity is constantly nosediving, and the growing discontent is repeatedly coming in the forms of the far right. And actually, one moment. And again, I'm not a free speech absolutist, and I'm certainly not a fan of any form of, right-wing movements. But when the government does clamp down on the free speech of, of the far right, like deplatforming Alex Jones and all the social media outlets, this type of suppression then gets used against the left, and then we see the censorship of RT, Press TV, Telesort, CTGN, etc. And again, if they can do this, if a state and an EU member NATO state can do this to a Georgescu, they can do this to anyone of the left. So I'm curious your response. Yes, yeah, I'm curious your response to that.
Well, I'm among a very few people, that are not supporting this type of candidates, but at the same time are trying to raise awareness, because exactly as you say, if you're not willing to support those that you don't necessarily agree with, then be prepared for the same time of abuse to be targeted against you. Be prepared to be the next victim if you support, and if you're not willing to fight, for what's right. Because the problem here is that how did we ended up in this situation? How did we ended up with a situation where Romanians would vote? Because, you are not preventing Calin Georgescu from running. You are also preventing millions of Romanians from voting for him. What do you do?
Yeah, exactly.
You are exactly preventing, and how are you saving democracy? By preventing people from voting their candidate. This is very problematic, because 2 million of Romanians already voted for him. You crushed that, you annulled those elections, and now you are preventing him from running again. And I don't know the idea is that probably the authorities think, oh, we did it. Now we are on the safe side. And I'm more scared than ever, Youri, because these things tend to blow up in your face when you expect the least. We expected the least, and they tend to get from bad to worse. I mean, the first comment that I made when they annulled the election was, okay, you banned this one. Think how about the next one, because it will be a next one. What would you do then? Because it will go from bad to worse. And you have to ask yourselves, how did we ended up in this situation? How did we ended up here?
Exactly.
And I'm pretty sure, and we ended up here by closing down debate, by doing all these cancellations, by thinking of ourselves, as better, and not, not giving a platform, the rhetoric, and unfortunately it was very popular on the left. We are not giving these idiots a platform. We are not giving these fascists a platform. We are not discussing with them. What did I tell you? Do you remember, Youri? Probably you weren't paying attention, but I told you, because we had these conversations before. Okay, so you don't talk to the working class who are being exploited from 14 years old working, 12, 14 hours a day in construction sites. You don't discuss with them, because probably they're Pentecostals, probably they're Orthodox, probably they are conservatives, and you don't talk to them. Okay. You don't, because they are misogynistic, they are xenophobic, they are not educated, they have all sorts of crazy views about the world, and you don't talk to them. Okay, guess who's gonna talk to them? This type of people. Because if you're not talking to them, don't engage in a dialogue, then these are the vast majority, unfortunately, in Romania. If you don't talk to them, and if you don't, as the left, build your platform around their needs, because you have to think of yourself as a servant for them, not as some sort of teacher scolding them because they don't have, the perfect hygiene and the perfect ideas and the most progressive ideals in life. They're never going to listen to you. And then the far right is going to come and going to discuss with them, are going to give them, the idea that they are important. And guess what? You end up with this type of individuals. And then the academia, again. We had all these conferences about the EU. We never let somebody who had rational criticisms, thinking about, like Veronica Salminen, who did a very interesting research, rational scientific report research on the EU center versus periphery. Do we have financial institutions? Where are the investments coming from? Are we able in the EU periphery to form our own companies, our own economic independence, or are we dependent from the center? What is the relation between our periphery and the center? Nothing. And we also equated rational criticisms done by very serious researchers with all sorts of crazy people saying that the globalists are gonna come and insert chips into our heads to make us gay.
Yeah. But yes, that is very true. That there is no room for legitimate criticisms of the EU, and there's lots of legitimate criticisms of the EU that does need to be had, and it's only a very small number of leftists that are doing it, like Yanis Varoufakis, and and so forth, and because of that, yeah, as you mentioned, the far right has now taken those legitimate concerns of the EU and have spun it into something, yes, crazy, but there is still kernels of truth in even their criticisms of the European Union, like the issue of sovereignty and why does joining the EU automatically mean that we support NATO, which should be something completely different, but there you go. So then I had to ask this, because you mentioned very early in our conversation, this is my last question, but you mentioned something very early in our conversations that unfortunately a lot of the, I guess you can call them the institutional left, is actually supportive of barring Georgescu from running in the elections. Because that's interesting, because I was watching a friend of mine, Dimitri Lascaris, and he had this very young journalist, Rami, who works on this outlet, Reason to Resist. And he actually went to Romania to cover the protests that was happening against Georgescu. And I asked him during during their live stream if many people on the left are actually supportive of Georgescu for whatever reason, and he actually said that the Communist Party of Romania is actually supportive of Georgescu and a lot of his programs and advocacy, because they believe that it aligns in terms with some of their programs, like helping out the struggling working class and
yes,
stuff like
yes.
that.
But you have to understand. Yes, please.
Yeah, and Rami also mentioned that Georgescu, he is an independent candidate, so he's quite a big tent person. So I actually wanted your response. So I actually wanted your response to that. And somebody, somebody also said, I may not like his policies, but if you bar him, what's to stop the undemocratic elites from barring any leftists in the future? So I'm curious your response to that.
Yes, of course, but you have to understand that the Socialist Party is a very small party, and it's a party formed of people who are a bit nostalgic and they regret the socialist era. And it's also formed by mainly elderly people. And I don't know how representative it is. It is representative. It's a part of the left. They call themselves the left. They are culturally conservative, but socially very, very progressive, as was our country. It was very culturally extremely regressive, in the sense that it was one of the most regressive countries in the Soviet and Eastern Bloc. But it was economically very progressive. And this is how this party is. But there are those, activists, the members of the newly formed Democracy and Solidarity, the Party Sense, the Party Repair, who call themselves, progressives and leftists, and who are with queer, gay liberation, all the cultural tropes that are usually associated with the left. I would say they're basically more liberal, then these themes are more associable with the liberals than the left, but nevertheless, and these people are saying that we have to prevent Georgescu from running because she's a fascist. We have to prevent Diana Șoșoacă from running because she's a fascist. And it is like we escaped Hitler, and we should be very thankful for what the Constitutional Court did, because this was the next Trump or the next Hitler, and they are very taken with this idea, and they are very much afraid that this type of leadership, George Simeon and all these people, will be very prone in enacting measures that will target sexual minorities. And probably they are, I mean, what is missing here is enough polls and enough research to see whether this is the case or not. I read our, platform, and they say that it is their opinion that a family is formed by a biological male and a biological female. They want to return to this perspective where sex is more important than gender. And for the left that was associated with all these liberal, progressive, individualistic, ideas of expressing yourself, choosing your clothes, your politics, your gender, your body, your everything, I call this a form of hyper-individualism, if we understand it like this. I mean, if we are very consistent ideologically, it's all about the individual and the right of self-expression, self-determination. And these people who are also associate themselves with the left are very scared. And I can empathize with that, because
my only problem with their arguments, their supporting of barring Georgescu is, okay, so you're afraid that the gates of Nazism is going to be storming the barricades, but where the hell were all of you guys when the other center-right parties and liberal parties were still barring reproductive rights and stuff like that, and we're still trampling on the rights of workers of all sorts of backgrounds? So I just don't understand that ridiculous logic.
Up to a point, because I try to be very nuanced and I try to show empathy, and up to a point I can understand that if you are a member of a sexual minority or if you were very close to this type of ideals of expressing yourself, choosing your body, cutting body parts, putting body parts because you want to express yourself and you want to be your true self and whatever, I think you will be very scared to see these people who are rather conservatives coming to power. So far, I can understand this. What I don't understand is the idea that you don't see that this is not the right way. The right way is to beat these people in the elections, is to convince the Romanian people, because if millions of Romanians are willing to support that, that is where the danger is. They are only the representatives of your fellow Romanians, that are willing to vote for that. And this is where the problem is. Because what do? You prevent your fellow Romanians from voting, and you expect them just to behave and sit tightly, and you don't expect any bad consequence coming from this. I mean, this is very short-sighted, to say the least. And yeah, I mean, the left has a big problem. I told you, it became very elitist. It became focused on the problems of activists, of precarious intellectual workers, and very disconnected from the common people. I mean, their language, their publications, all their activism was a bit disconnected from the real problems of, and it was also this type of privatized left.
And we're just talking about just like the Romanian left in like Romanian
Yes,
language.
in Romania, I'm telling you what happened in Romania, and it was also a form of privatized left that was competing for grants in order to sustain itself, and was competing for grants to fight domestic violence, to fight, was competing for grants, and it was this project-based left. And unfortunately, that led to the situation where you had political parties, exploiting the grievances of people, and you disconnected yourself from the vast majority of Romanians, and now you are desperate because you see that they are willing to vote for something like that. Well,
and actually, final question that I have to ask that is when we do talk about problems that are facing majority of Romanians, which is very grotesque levels of poverty, people who are in such people who, even if they have jobs, it's paid very little to help with the cost of living. So some Romanians do find themselves having to go to other parts of Europe. It could be other parts of Eastern Europe or even Western Europe or Britain and so forth, in the hopes that in the hopes of a better job. And when we do see levels of domestic violence, and I believe we next time I have you on, we should talk about the Andrew Tate scandals, because you said that Romania highest levels of women of all ages and depressingly even very young ages, girls as young as 12, 13 years old, trafficked and so forth. A lot of that, hate to sound like a boring old cranky lefty, but a lot of that is because of the grotesque transition from Romania's social market economy into, the shock doctrine and endless austerity and so forth. And is it safe to say then, from a lot of your complaints about the left, is the left, whether it's the big institutional left, which is very weak, and even the very they just have not been able to connect that the reason why we have all of these unspeakable levels of misery and so forth is because of
definitely.
the false promise of the European Union, NATO, and whatnot, and the end of communism.
Well, it was the promise of the European Union, and unfortunately, since we didn't have a space for rational debate, as I told some comrades in another collective where you and I are there, you remember, we entered the European Union with very high expectations, but we entered like a child. We entered like an immature person, and we entered on an emotional basis, wanted to be recognized, wanted to be, accepted, wanted to be, like the civilized West, wanting to become more, we didn't like ourselves, and we wanted to enter this select club in order to become ourselves like the members of that select club. It was an aspirational, ideal when we entered, and not enough research was done to reflect this emotional basis of our attachment to, for the EU. And then people saw that this is a very cruel, tough, club where you have to look for yourself because nobody's gonna look for yourself, and all these ideas, with a big family where we all hug together. It's, a nice dream, but you have to work for it because, it's a very nice ideal, but, it doesn't mean that, and it doesn't always translate into the economics and politics that would advantage and further such ideals, of solidarity, collaboration, shared prosperity, and all the rest. And you have to look for your own interests and be very, very careful And because we were so disappointed economically, it was, you had a lover, you are very enthusiastic, then they start abusing you, and then you end up, disappointed and abused. And this is currently, I would say, the situation of Romanians. I would just mention here that I just read a 700 long pages novel, exceptional novel. You read it in 2 days. It's so incredibly well written, by Natalia Onofrei, who wrote about migration and all the tragedy of migration, because it was sold like a huge opportunity. Well, in fact, it was a little bit further from that ideal, that you go abroad and you find a job and you compete on the job market. Well, how are you going to compete where your choice is to do a menial, poorly paid job in the West or starve to death in your own country? Is this really a choice? Is this really a choice? Is this really freedom? Is this really an opportunity? And again, of course, there were, researches conducted on migration, and I think more has to be done. More has to be done because 5 million Romanians left the country in order to save themselves. A lot of people wanted to save themselves and the children from extreme poverty, but they left the children here with a drunken husband, with some drunken relatives, with some crazy neighbors, can you imagine? And those children were the ones who paid the horrible price of migration. I mean, this is a very complex phenomenon that cannot be reduced to the economic success of their parents and the fact that they were able to send money home and they were able to, to see some progress economically for them and their families. And yeah, this is another topic that should be widely debated in the Romanian society, but unfortunately it is not. And again, you should know that Aud and Calin Georgescu were very popular among the migrants, about Romania and the community of Romanian migrants. And you'd expect those who went in the European Union and saw this wonderful place where they were able to work to vote for some pro-EU candidate. And the fact that these people are voting for somebody who is a EU skeptic, or not even a EU skeptic, but somebody who is not an enthusiasm of the EU, should raise very, very important question marks. And the Romanian intellectuals, you have, for instance, a person like Mircea Toma, who is a psychologist. He has a lot of humor. He was the editor-in-chief of a very important humor magazine in Romania, a very nice magazine. And he's a person with nuances, a very smart person. What does he say? He said that Russia had this campaign where they incentivized people to buy all this, fake medicine, and then they created a database with these people who are stupid enough to believe conspiracy theories and the fact that you could heal cancer with water or holy water or whatever. And then after they had the database, they came with these candidates that pushed those pedals. But I mean, come on. This is the only explanation you can come up with. This is the explanation you can come up with for the tragedy. How are these people ended up in the situation that they believe these things? Don't you wonder? How did we ended up here?
No, and
this is the type of explanation, that is presented for the public. Romanians are stupid and conspiratorial. Okay, thank you very much. If this is the explanation, and a person you would expect to have, a very nuanced perspective and vision on reality gives. Okay.
Yeah,
I have nothing more to say. Okay.
Well, and not only that, but in recent years, the far right, the far right or the new right wing movements, they realize that there are a lot of poor people, and you do have to convert the working class to your line of thinking. And that's why a party like Law and Justice can say, oh, if you're a struggling single mother, we're going to give you these sort of benefits. Donald Trump, your jobs are going overseas. I'm going to punish companies that go overseas by hitting them with a 25% tariff and so forth like that. And I think even I think even a party like Reform Party, Nigel Farage's latest project promises a lot of stuff for young people, for struggling entrepreneurs, and even says if you're a struggling person, we're actually not even going to tax you and stuff like that. So the far right now has is realizing if we want to destroy the liberal parties, if we want to even unseat the traditional center-right parties, we have to promise stuff to the working class, which is why which is why for the working class who feel they have no left to vote for because the left is either very weak or in a place like Romania, anything socialism equals Stalinist monster ships and so forth will resonate with Georgescu or whomever who at least in their platform promises this stuff for the working class and the precarious middle class. So I think it's very important to mention that, and I'm really glad you talked about all of that stuff, which comes all that stuff of the European Union, because very rarely do we hear all of this stuff. It's simply, if you don't believe in the European Union, you're a stupid, bigoted, ignorant, loser and stuff like that. So.
But how did those people ended up, like that? Because I keep asking, and I think this is what the left should ask. Because those people, when they came home from the maternity ward, when they were brought home by their mothers, they weren't stupid. They were like the same. How did they ended up like that? You have to ask yourself. This is the important,
Exactly.
the important question that I leave the viewers with.
Exactly. Well, we're going to continue to monitor what's going on in Romania, and I'll just end with saying that the European Union, your credibility is already very badly damaged, and you're digging your own grave by actually barring a candidate. And I would say that for all of those pro-EU folks in Romania, especially those on the left. Well, we are joined on this edition of 1+1, our All Things Eastern European edition, our All Things Romania edition with Dr. Maria Cernat. Let me remind folks, Dr. Maria Cernat is the president of the Institute for Media Research and Human Rights and lecturer at the Faculty of Communication Sciences and International Relations at Titu Maiorescu, where she is the assistant professor of the Faculty of Communication Sciences, International Relations, Department of Communications, and Public Relations. And check out Maria's new independent media project, Pacifist Barricade. And for our friends at World Beyond War, Maria is part of World Beyond War's Romanian chapter. So if you're from Romania, live in Romania, or you're an Eastern European leftist, do get in touch with World Beyond War's Romanian chapter, and let's advance the peace movement and rational folks. And also, don't forget, folks, to please donate to 1+1. Any donations is greatly appreciated. Until then, Maria, thank you so much for joining me. Looking forward to having you back on. And until then, good night and good luck. And and I don't know what to say to the Romanians, but I guess keep fighting for real democracy, because barring Georgescu, it's going to eventually wind us to bite us in the ass. So ciao until then.